All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome, everybody. And it's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker this seminar, Professor Stephen Broussardi. Steve is a professor in School of Geosciences at the University of Edinburgh from Scotland. And he's originally from Chicago, United States, where he did his undergraduate studies in geophysical sciences, then studied paleobiology and earth sciences at the University of Bristol. And he did his PhD at Columbia University in New York. Steve is broadly interested in vertebrate paleontology, and he's a renowned expert in the evolution of dinosaurs. He named more than 15 new fossil species and has done fieldwork across the world, including Transylvania, where he collaborated with Hungarian scientists, including Zoltán Csiky Sava and the late Mátyás Remir, and our former colleague from this department. His research has been funded by many organizations, including the National Geographic Society, the Royal Society, the Liberty Trust, and he was an ERC grant awardee as well. Steve is also a prolific writer. He publishes a dozen papers every year, in total 150 to date, peer-reviewed journals in various journals, including Nature, PNAS, and so forth. He also published 8 books. The first one, while he was in high school, several children books about dinosaurs, for example, The Field Guide to Dinosaurs, A Time Traveler's Survival Guide, an academic book, Dinosaur Paleobiology, and the bestseller popular science book entitled The Rise and the Fall of the Dinosaurs, is the same as the title of his talk today. Unfortunately, as far as I know, there is no Hungarian translation yet of this book, but it was an international bestseller in several countries, in the US, in the UK and Canada, and there are several international editions, so hopefully someday we can read it in Hungarian, but in the meantime, I would highly encourage everyone to read it. It's really enjoyable. So it's not just it was a bestseller, but actually the former President Bill Clinton said that that's the best book I read in this year when he read it. Steve is deeply involved in scientific outreach. He has been the dino expert consultant for various programs, including the Jurassic World movie franchise and BBC's Walking with Dinosaurs program. However, if after all this you think that he is a nerdy fossil geek, you're very much mistaken. Steve also worked as a sports reporter for local news outlet, covering various sports events, and he's very much into baseball and different sports. So after this talk, once we are done discussing dinosaurs, if you're like me, that you have no idea how baseball works, you might ask him, and I'm sure that he can explain that one too. So with that, please welcome Professor Steve Broussardi.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, and Adam and Attila for the invitation to speak to you guys. I guess one of the few good things about the way the world has changed over the last 18 months is that we have a lot of these online seminars now, so it's a chance to meet up with people and meet new people and talk to people that maybe we wouldn't have been able to if we were still traveling around and doing these things in person. So it's really fun for me to sync up with you guys and have a chance to talk dinosaurs to students and faculty of one of the great universities of Central Europe, and part of the world that's really special to me because of the field work I've done in Romania, and what's now Romania, but of course field work that I've done in the former lands of Hungary with some great Hungarian colleagues, including my dear late friend Mátyás. Okay, so look, we got about an hour, including maybe some time to talk baseball, but I don't want to waffle on too much. I want to dive into the talk. And so I'm going to share my screen now. It looks like you're just going to have to give me permission to share the screen because it says it's disabled for participants. So you can just do that.
Yeah, just a second. Yep. Trying to figure out how to do that. Or Attila, you're doing it?
Yeah, you can try to share it now.
This should be good. Okay, I think you guys should be seeing this, seeing my screen here. Okay, I think that's good. Now, are you seeing the little bar on the side of everybody of the video and stuff? I guess it doesn't matter too much, but okay. So Great. So I'm going to talk to you about dinosaurs today. And what I want to do is tell you the story of dinosaurs. I want to tell you the story of dinosaur evolution from start to finish. And I want to do this in a pretty quick amount of time. So I'm going to go fast, but I want to give you the big picture. So first of all, thank you for the very kind introduction. That was way too long and way too nice. But the important thing really is I'm based here in Edinburgh, here in Scotland, and actually sunny Scotland today. I don't know if any of you have ever been here. This is a rare day where the sun is shining, but I'm very privileged to get to teach at one of the great universities here in the UK, and I think the world, here at the University of Edinburgh, and to study dinosaurs for my profession, which is an amazing thing. A couple of years ago, I wrote this book, The Rise and Fall of the Dinosaurs, and that's just the US cover and the UK cover. And it was a lot of fun to put the book together. And what I tried to do in the book was to tell the story of dinosaurs, of where they came from, of how they rose up to become dominant, how some of them became really, really, really big, how others became really small and evolved feathers and wings and became the birds of today, and then how the rest of them went extinct. And in the book, I also tried to weave together some of my stories of working with people like Maciej Bremir and others all over the world, my amazing colleagues that have made so many of these incredible discoveries that taught us so much about dinosaurs, especially over the last few decades. So it's been a lot of fun to see people read the book and to see it translated into different languages. And I'm very happy to say that there will be a Hungarian translation. This is really new. I was literally sent this yesterday. This is a draft of the cover. So I was so excited to see it because I knew I could put it into this talk. So hopefully the cover looks nice. Hopefully the Hungarian there is correct. You never know with the translations of these books into languages that you don't speak. But I'm so excited that it's going to be out in Hungarian, and I'm told that it should be out later this autumn. So I don't know, maybe October, November, I'm not quite sure, but it should be out soon. Anyway, okay, look, enough about that. I want to tell you the story of dinosaurs. It's a story that took place over 160 million years. I'm going to try to do it in about 40 or 45 minutes so we have time for questions. So I'm going to go fast, and I'm going to start at the beginning. And this is what the world looked like about 250 million years ago at the very end of the Permian period. And this is when all of the land was gathered together into the supercontinent of Pangaea. Now, this was a very harsh place. This was a difficult place to live, especially the center of that supercontinent. There were enormous deserts. It was very hot. It was very dry. But there were plants and animals that were adapted to live on that world, including many of our distant ancestors. Some of the early members of the mammal line, which were actually the top predators and the top plant eaters in many ecosystems. And there were giant amphibians and all kinds of other things. But then that world changed, and it changed very quickly and very catastrophically, because about 250 million years ago, these enormous volcanoes started to erupt in what is now Russia. And for millions of years, they spewed out lava. You know, these were volcanoes unlike any volcanoes that we as humans have ever seen. And so that lava, it covered a huge land area. I mean, a land area greater than all of Europe put together. And that wasn't even the big problem. The big problem was that coming up from the deep earth with the lava was a lot of carbon dioxide and methane and these other nasty gases that poison the atmosphere and led to runaway global warming. And that climate change led to a mass extinction, the biggest extinction that's ever happened. About 95% of all species might have died out in that extinction. The closest life has ever come to completely dying out. But as always with extinctions, there were some survivors. And it's from those survivors that our story begins. Now, when I was a student, I was really interested in this extinction at the end of the Permian. I wanted to know what happened, what caused the extinction, what lived, what died, and how quickly things recovered in the next period of geological time, which is the Triassic period. That's the time after the extinction. So I started to do a lot of work in Poland, not too far from where you guys are. and maybe a place that when a lot of people think of fossils or think of dinosaurs, a place like Poland maybe doesn't come to mind. It doesn't fit that stereotype you might see on television of an explorer, somebody who looks like Indiana Jones going out to the desert and it's hot and it's dry and they're brushing sand off the bone. It doesn't fit the image at all. But that is not where we find fossils all the time. We can find fossils anywhere where there is rock of the right age and the right type. And that includes places like Hungary. There's the great fossil site in Hungary that my friend Attila Ursi has been working on for many years, a Cretaceous age fossil site, and that's basically an old mine. And it's similar in Poland. There's a lot of these quarries where they're digging up clay to make bricks. And that clay is actually layers and layers of rock. And those layers span that extinction, the Permian, and then into the Triassic. And those layers are full of fossils, and you can read those layers like the pages in a book to tell the story of the extinction. Now, the fossils that we have in Poland, we do have some bones, some skeletons, but most of the fossils are footprints and handprints, the marks that these animals left behind. And my friend Gregor here has been collecting these ever since he was a teenager. Now, some of the footprints and handprints that we start to see just about 1 million years after that extinction are these tiny little ones here. This is a handprint, and this is a footprint. And as you can see, they're just about 1 centimeter or 2 long. They're just about the size of the hands and feet of a house cat. This is a very small animal that made these tracks. It was an animal that would have looked something like this. And we can tell what it looked like just based on the spacing between the tracks, but also because we do have bones from other parts of the world that match the footprints pretty well. And so this animal, again, about the size of a house cat, kind of a strange looking animal, maybe a little bit awkward, very long arms, very long legs, this long tail, this very skinny body. It might not look very impressive, but what you are looking at here is essentially the ancestor of the dinosaurs. This is the type of animal, the type of reptile that dinosaurs came from. T-Rexes and Brontosauruses and all those dinosaurs that we know and love would have had an ancestor that looked like this, that was living and evolving and diversifying right after that mass extinction. But those first dinosaurs and their close ancestors, they did not dominate the world of the Triassic. And we get a sense of what was dominant at that time with some other field work that we've done, including in Portugal. Now, this does look maybe a little bit more like you might see on TV. It's very hot and dry, and we are digging up bones with hammers and chisels and so on. But in Portugal, there's also some really good Triassic rocks. And what we have in those rocks are lots and lots of skeletons. We have a graveyard, actually, of what looks to be hundreds of skeletons. We've only collected a small part of it, but there looks to be hundreds of skeletons. But these are not dinosaurs. These are these types of animals, and these are giant amphibians, essentially giant salamanders. They're about the size of a small car. And these were the types of animals that in the Triassic period, after that mass extinction, these were the animals that were the dominant ones in the lakes, in the rivers, and near the water. So if you were one of those early dinosaurs, you would want to stay away from the water because these were the things at the top of the food chain. And things were no better on dry land because the Triassic was the age of crocodiles. And really what it was a bunch of very close relatives and ancestors of today's crocodiles were thriving in the Triassic period. They were the ones that after the extinction really diversified. And they evolved into a whole bunch of different species, and some of them became really big. Some of them were 9-10 meters long. Some of them had spikes and armor all over their bodies. Some of them ate meat, some of them ate plants, some of them even lost all of their teeth, like this one, and had beaks. So you can imagine a crocodile with a beak. And this thing had a sail on its back, What's that? And some other ones only walked on 2 legs. So there was this great diversity of the crocs, much more than dinosaurs. So the interesting thing is during the Triassic period, the dinosaurs were there, they were originating, they were evolving, they were starting to diversify after that extinction, but they were not dominant. They were not at the top of the food chain. There was nothing that looked like a T-Rex or a Brontosaurus. There were no dinosaurs that were anywhere near that big. And that's really interesting. And that's basically the first 40 or 50 million years of the history of dinosaurs. They were there, but they were not very special. But then something changed, because we know that dinosaurs later became these amazing, enormous, dominant animals. And what changed was, about 200 million years ago, the supercontinent of Pangaea started to break apart. And of course it did. That's why we have separate continents today. That's why we have a North America, and we have a South America, and an Africa, and so on. Now, when Pangaea started to break apart, it split. And today, the splits, that's basically where the Atlantic Ocean. So South America split from Africa, North America split from Europe. Now those gaps are filled with water. But before the water rushed in, the earth bled lava. So this was another time of enormous volcanic eruptions, of lots and lots of lava coming from the deep earth, and all of those greenhouse gases coming with the lava. So again, there was global warming, and again, there was a mass extinction. It wasn't quite as bad as that previous one, but still probably something like 70% of species died out. And it was this extinction that closed out the Triassic period and began the Jurassic period. And it's in the Jurassic period that we finally get the dinosaurs that we all know and recognize. And it was in the Jurassic period where we get these enormous meat eaters the size of buses, where we get even bigger long-necked dinosaurs, some of which become as large as Boeing 737 airplanes. This is when we get all of these fantastic dinosaurs with horns and spikes and frills and duckbills and dome heads and plates on their backs and so on. There's a reason that the book and the movie are called Jurassic Park. If it was Triassic Park, it wouldn't be about dinosaurs. It would be about crocodiles and giant salamanders, which would be cool, but it wouldn't be a dinosaur story. And the point is, it's really only in the Jurassic period that the dinosaurs eclipsed the crocs. And we don't know why. What we do know is that dinosaurs were the great survivors of this extinction as the supercontinent broke apart, whereas the crocs were some of the great victims. Almost all of those species of crocs, and also almost all of those giant salamanders, died out. We know that was the case. We don't know why. We don't know if the dinosaurs grew faster, if they could run faster, if they were smarter, if they were warm-blooded, whatever. We don't know for sure. It's one of the biggest mysteries about dinosaur evolution, why they survived that extinction when their competitors, who had been doing much better than the dinosaurs, were hit so hard. And I do think it is one of the biggest mysteries, and I do think it's something that will be solved by somebody in the next generation, the young generation of paleontologists. But regardless, as the Jurassic period came in, the age of dinosaurs properly began. And this is when dinosaurs really diversified. And nowadays, we know of over 1,500 species of dinosaurs. We are finding more dinosaurs than ever before, somewhere around the world, including in Hungary. Somebody is finding a new dinosaur once a week on average. So there's about 50 new species every year. And this is because there are more people all over the world looking. In places like Hungary, for instance, where in the past, people didn't think there were dinosaurs. And it's a new generation, it's a young generation. It's not just, the little boys that go and become paleontologists anymore. There's many young women in the field, and there's people all over the world. And we are finding dinosaurs everywhere, and we are even finding them right here in Scotland. Another place that doesn't really fit that stereotype of dinosaurs that you might see dug up on TV. But there's one place in Scotland, just one place so far, where you can find dinosaurs, and it is an island off the west coast, an island called the Isle of Skye. One of the most beautiful places in the world, at least to me. And I was just there. I just got back from Skye on Tuesday. I was there with some of our undergraduate students who are doing geology mapping projects there. And it's a great place to map the rocks, because there are a lot of rocks, and these rocks form cliffs and mountains and crags. And a lot of those rocks are Jurassic in age. They're about 170 million years old. And Skye is a great place to take our students. And I tried it, at least before COVID, tried to take the students there at least once a year. The students always find the best fossils. This is one of our students, Amelia, in the middle there. And what she's looking at is the head of a pterodactyl that she found. And actually it connects to a skeleton. And this is what we're working on right now. I have the manuscript like on my desktop. Later today, I have to do some of the final edits before I send it to our other co-authors. This is like the most exciting thing for us now. But a great fossil found by a student. We take our students out and we train our students in field techniques. This is Moji, who came from Nigeria to study in our master's course. We have a one-year master's course, which is something for those of you that are interested in paleontology that you might want to consider. It's a one-year research-intensive course where we train you in paleontology. And Moji was studying fossil fish, so she's using this little angle grinder tool to take out the small little fish bones. But when it comes to dinosaurs, we need bigger tools. The rocks are very hard, so we need these diamond tip saws. And this is our friend Doogie Ross, who grew up on Skye, he's a builder by trade. So he has the saws, he knows how to use them. And he's actually such a good builder that he built his own museum where he puts the fossils that he finds. And if any of you ever visit the Isle of Skye, you can go to this museum. It's called the Staffen Museum. Now, I want to tell you one story about a discovery on Skye, which illustrates to me why Skye and the Scottish dinosaurs are important. And this was a discovery we made about 5 years ago, way up the northern tip of the island. I'm taking this photograph. I'm standing in the shadows of the ruins of a 14th century castle. It's a very Scottish scene. And it's a beautiful day. You can see that the sky is blue. It's not raining. It's one of those rare days in Scotland. And you might ask, why am I taking a picture instead of trying to look for fossils when it's sunny? Well, the problem is that the tide is high. We had to wait till the tide went down because that beach turns into a big rock platform full of Jurassic rock. And we went there to look for small bones and skeletons. And we didn't find any. We spent all day looking for bones. We found nothing. And then at the end of the day, we started to go back to our cars and we started to notice that there were these holes in the rock. And these were tidal pools. There was seaweed in there. There were hermit crabs and barnacles and all of these things. They were tidal pools. But they seemed a bit odd to us. They were really big. Each one was about the size of a car tire. And the more we looked, we could see that there was actually over 100 of these on the rock platform. And a lot of them formed a sequence, kind of a left-right zigzagging sequence. We could see some of these from the side, and we could see that they were actually impressed into the rock before it was rock. So something was pressing down into this rock when it was still soft sand. So this wasn't just the water eroding these holes today. And then we could see some of them actually had bits sticking out. 1, 2, 3, 4. We could see that some of them were paired together. A bigger horseshoe-shaped one, a smaller crescent-shaped one in front. And these things were big, about the size of car tires. So it dawned on us that we had been looking for bones, but we should have been looking for other fossils. These were fossils, but they were fossil footprints and handprints, so much bigger than the ones from Poland, because now we're in the Jurassic and dinosaurs are much bigger. And there's really only one type of dinosaur, one type of animal that has ever lived in the entire history of the Earth that was so big that every time its hands or feet hit the ground, it would leave a hole the size of a car tire. And these were those giant long-necked dinosaurs, what we call the Sauropod dinosaurs. This is the group that includes things like Brontosaurus and Brachiosaurus and Diplodocus. And the sauropods that were making those footprints on Skye were probably about the size of 3 elephants put together. They were the largest animals that had ever lived up to that point in time. And they are a sign that dinosaurs were getting so much bigger and so much more dominant in the Jurassic. Now, we keep finding more tracks on Skye. This is Paige. She's one of my students, and Paige has a geology background and an engineering background. So Paige has really merged those talents to map a lot of the new track sites. And so Paige uses drones. She uses some of her own techniques, her own little handmade tools to take the great array of high quality photographs to make maps of all of these sites. And these maps are really important because they help us understand how many dinosaurs were making footprints and what environments they were making the tracks in, and the sizes of those dinosaurs and what those dinosaurs were. And we can tell now that we have lots of different dinosaurs making these tracks. Not only these giant long neck dinosaurs, but we also have tracks that were made by stegosaurs, some of those dinosaurs with plates on their backs. We have some tracks that were made by primitive duck-billed dinosaurs, these great plant eaters that would later get to be quite big themselves. And we also have tracks that were made by meat eaters that walked on only 2 legs, like this one here in the foreground. Much smaller than these giant sauropods, but a very important animal, because these were the types of dinosaurs, believe it or not, that T-Rex evolved from. And you might not guess it looking at them. This dinosaur here is just about the size of a human. And here's an even better example from China, that we have nearly complete skeletons of these dinosaurs. They would have weighed no more than I weigh, and they would have been no bigger than me. But these were the very first tyrannosaurs. They were living more than 100 million years before T-Rex. But it was from these humble beginnings that tyrannosaurs got their start. Now we know that much later tyrannosaurs got to be huge. So the question, the mystery really, is why tyrannosaurs went from these very small human-sized animals and then changed into things like T-Rex that were the size of buses. And we have a clue, a new clue, and this is a new species of tyrannosaur, and it's from a place, again, that maybe you might not think of when you think of dinosaurs, but it's from Uzbekistan. And we named this a few years ago as a new species, and we called it Timberlandia, named after a Central Asian warlord, something maybe kind of in the greater Hungarian history you can appreciate. And what's important about Timberlandia is that it's intermediate. So it's from the early part of the Cretaceous period, which is the next time after the Jurassic, is kind of in between the first smallest tyrannosaurs and the latest giant tyrannosaurs in time, but also in size. It's about the size of a horse. So it's still quite small, but what's interesting is we have skull bones of this tyrannosaur. This is it here. You're looking at the back of the head. This is the hole where the spinal cord goes into the brain cavity. And we can CAT scan this, which we did in Edinburgh. We can use computer software to make digital models of the spaces inside of the skull. So the brain cavity, the sinuses, the nerves, the ears. And that means we can make a model of the brain and the ears. So this right here in the lower right-hand corner is what the brain, at least the back end of this brain of this tyrannosaur would have looked like. And there's 2 important things here. First of all, the blue bit is the brain itself, and that is a big brain for the size, for an animal the size of a horse, for a dinosaur the size of a horse. So that tells us that these tyrannosaurs were getting pretty smart. This bit in pink here is the ear, and this is the cochlea of the ear, this bit that hangs down, and that's the part that hears sound. And we know from living animals that the longer the cochlea, the greater range of sounds you could hear. So this tyrannosaur is a very long cochlea, so it could hear very well. So basically what this means is while tyrannosaurs were still pretty small, they were getting bigger brains, they were becoming smarter, and their senses were becoming a lot sharper. And it was those things that probably helped them survive while they were still small. And then when some of the other big meat eaters of the day, like the allosaurs and the spinosaurs, went extinct, tyrannosaurs were able to survive. And then in the latest Cretaceous, they evolved into these giants at the top of the food chain, like T-Rex itself. And what's amazing about T-Rex is, yes, it's really big. It was the size of a bus. It weighed 7 or 8 tons. It had a head the size of a bathtub. You know, we could fit inside of its mouth. You know, it had 50 teeth. Each one was the size of a banana. It crushed through the bones of its prey. You know, it was a terrifying dinosaur, but it was also a smart dinosaur. It retained those big brains and keen senses from its smaller ancestors. So T-Rex had both brawn and brains. And that's really what allowed it to be the greatest predator, the largest pure meat eater that's ever lived on land in the history of life. Now, while tyrannosaurs were getting bigger, though, there was a group of closely related meat-eating dinosaurs that were doing the opposite, and they were getting smaller. And these were the raptor dinosaurs. So this here is Velociraptor. I'm sure you know Velociraptor from Jurassic Park. I'm not going to criticize Jurassic Park too much. You know, First of all, because I love the films, and they're very important films. They're great films. They're great entertainment. They did a lot of good for paleontology. They got so many people around the world interested in dinosaurs. But also because now I'm the consultant, the science advisor for the Jurassic World series. So of course I don't want to criticize, but I don't have much to criticize. But one thing that I will say is that the velociraptors are very inaccurate. The real velociraptor does not look like the ones in the film. The real velociraptor was only about the size of a poodle dog, and one of the small poodles, ones you could hold like in your arms. And the real velociraptor had feathers, and the real velociraptor even had wings. It really would have looked a lot like a bird. And this is not a guess. This is not some crazy artwork by a mad artist. This is stuff we know from actual fossils. We have fossils of raptor dinosaurs and many other dinosaurs covered in feathers. And these fossils are some of the most important fossils that have been found over the last 25 years or so. And the first ones were only found in the mid-1990s. And I remember reading about these in my hometown newspaper when I was a kid, and they were first announced. These fossils come from China. They come from northeastern China, a place called Liaoning, which is way up against the border with North Korea. So it's not a place that tourists get to very often. It's a place of a lot of factories and a lot of fields. They grow a lot of corn, a lot of wheat. And it was in the 90s that some of the farmers, when they were working their fields, started to find these incredible fossils, not only skeletons with all the bones preserved, but also feathers surrounding the body and even wings on some of the arms. Amazing fossils. And in fact, nowadays, we know of over 1,000 of these feather-covered dinosaur fossils. And it just so happens that this part of China, in the Cretaceous period, was a forest. So there were lots of animals, lots of dinosaurs living in that forest. And then there were volcanoes nearby. And sometimes those volcanoes would erupt and they would bury everything in ash. Kind of like Pompeii in Italy, where you had that town with people that were buried by a volcano. So that's why you get all of these skeletons together, and that's why you get the details of the feathers preserved as fossils, because normally it is very hard for soft things like feathers or skin or muscles to be made into fossils. But here is a case where that quick burial by the volcanoes made that happen. These are really important fossils for a few reasons. First of all, they make it clear that birds evolved from dinosaurs. Birds are the only other animals that have feathers. Feathers are very complex. The fact that these dinosaurs have feathers, it really closed the case. Birds evolved from dinosaurs. But these fossils also tell us about how birds evolved from dinosaurs. And the first thing that these fossils tell us is that many dinosaurs had feathers, not only the raptors, not only the closest relatives of birds, but this right here is actually part of the tail of a tyrannosaur, one of those small primitive tyrannosaurs. And these are the bones, some of the tail bones here. And above the bones, these things that look like scratches in the rock, those are feathers. But they're very simple feathers. They would have just been little strands that would have looked a lot like hair. And many dinosaurs had these simple feathers covering their bodies. We have meat eaters and plant eaters. We have tyrannosaurs and raptors and many other dinosaurs. We have small dinosaurs, but we even have a tyrannosaur from China that is about 9 meters long that is covered in feathers. So fundamentally, this tells us that these simple feathers that look like hair, these were very common for dinosaurs. Feathers were to dinosaurs probably like what hair is to mammals. But these dinosaurs could not fly with those feathers, any more than we can fly with our hair. So feathers must have evolved for some reason other than flying. And we think most likely that was to help keep these dinosaurs warm. The same reason hair evolved in mammals. Mammals are warm-blooded. Some dinosaurs may have been warm-blooded, but definitely dinosaurs had higher metabolisms than other reptiles. So those feathers would have been a protective coat to retain that body heat that they were making. That's what we think. And that's what most dinosaurs kept. The same way, almost all mammals have some type of hair. But one type of dinosaur started to change those feathers, and these were the raptor dinosaurs. And as these raptors became smaller and smaller in size, those feathers got packed all over the body. And the feathers on the arms started to line up and get longer, and they started to branch out, so they weren't just simple little strands anymore, to the point where you have raptor dinosaurs with actual wings. And this is an example. Here's the arm of this dinosaur. There's the forearm. There's the hand. All of these things down here are feathers. They are flat, like the quill pen feathers of the wings of birds today. And they're lined up along the arm and the hand, just like in birds today. And you have layers of feathers over each other, just like in birds today. This is a proper wing. But it is not a bird. This is a raptor dinosaur. It is this raptor dinosaur. It is a new species that we named a few years ago, and we called it Zhenwanlong. And there it is in all of its beauty. It's about the size of a really big dog. And you can see its body is covered in feathers. And there's that wing. And there's this other wing right here. Remarkable. So this is a dinosaur with wings. But those wings would not really have been big enough for an animal of this size to fly. So if this animal flapped its wings, it probably couldn't really keep itself in the air. And in fact, there are even some other raptors and other related dinosaurs that are about the size of horses that have wings that are only about the size of like a laptop screen. Those were the first wings. So this is telling us that wings did not even evolve for flying. They must have evolved for another reason. And that might seem weird because you think about it, you know, why does an airplane have wings? So it can fly. Why does a bird have wings? So birds fly with their wings. And yes, of course, birds fly with their wings, but they do other things with their wings too. And these first dinosaurs with wings simply could not fly, so they must have been doing other things. And we think the most likely answer is that they were using those wings as display structures to attract mates, to intimidate rivals. Animals do so many things for display. And birds do this today. Just think of all the crazy feather colors and patterns that birds have. Yes, birds use their wings to fly, but think of the tail of a peacock. It's not flying with that. That's purely for display. And in fact, we can tell the colors of some of these dinosaur feathers because the melanosomes, these little organelles in the cells that produce pigment, they are preserved sometimes in really, really, really well preserved feathered dinosaur fossils. And we can tell that these dinosaurs had a variety of colors: black and white and brown and gray and ginger colored, and they had camouflage patterns and stripe patterns and all kinds of interesting stuff, which is incredible. So feathers did not evolve for flying. Wings did not evolve for flying. And you had dinosaurs like Zhenwanlong that would have looked something like this with their feathers, with their wings. I think if you saw it alive, you would probably think it was a bird. I don't know if this would be any weirder than a turkey or an ostrich or an emu, but we don't call it a bird simply because it could not fly with those wings. But you could imagine evolution, natural selection, doing its thing and taking an animal like this, making it a little bit smaller, making those wings a little bit bigger, to the point where you get something like this, that when this animal starts moving around those wings, it's just the laws of physics. Those wings may have evolved to be advertising billboards sticking out of the arms, but when an animal like this would move those billboards, by the simple laws of physics, they would start producing a little bit of lift, a little bit of thrust, and at this point, dinosaurs started to experiment with flying. And that's what led to birds. Now, it's something that does, confuse some people, and I do get people that try to argue sometimes that, okay, birds evolved from dinosaurs, but that doesn't mean we should call them dinosaurs. Birds are something different. They're dinosaurs that fly. We should not classify them as dinosaurs. And what I always say as a comeback is, what are these animals? Well, this is a bat. We all know bats. What is a bat? Well, a bat's a mammal. Of course, a bat's a mammal. It has hair. It feeds its babies with milk. It is a mammal. It's just a strange type of mammal that got smaller, evolved wings, and developed the ability to fly. And birds are the dinosaur equivalent to that. They're just a strange type of dinosaur that got smaller, evolved wings, and developed the ability to fly. And it just so happens that birds are the only dinosaurs that survive today. So if you imagine a world where the only mammals that survived were bats, that still means there's mammals. So that's what it is with birds. And that means there are over 10,000 species of dinosaurs that still live with us today. Majestic ones like our bald eagle here, ones that are not so majestic like the gulls you might see along the river on the beach. But I do think if you're on the beach or you're along the river and you're eating your ice cream, eating your chips, I think in that moment when you see the gulls, you sense the inner Velociraptor. As these gulls come down and attack you and try to steal your chips. They're cunning, they're nasty, they're vicious. You can see the dinosaur inside of them. And that's because they are dinosaurs. So dinosaurs do live on. They are still part of our world today, but only as birds. All the other dinosaurs are gone. All the T-Rexes, all the Brontosauruses, all the Triceratopses, they're all gone. And they disappeared very quickly, 66 million years ago at the end of the Cretaceous period, when the continents had moved to the point that the world looked like this, a world that's becoming much more modern. Not quite fully modern. Look at Europe there. Europe is basically flooded. So places like Hungary would have mostly been covered by water, although places like parts of Transylvania and the Carpathians were islands that stood out from the water, and that's where these amazing Romanian/Hungarian Transylvanian dinosaurs, the dwarf dinosaurs and so on that I've studied, that's where they lived, on this island in the very end of the Cretaceous, right here in the middle of Europe. And that's because, by the way, the world was much hotter, there were no ice caps at the poles, so sea level was much higher. But this was also the world of T-Rex and Triceratops. While these dwarf dinosaurs were living in Transylvania, you had T-Rexes and Triceratopses living in North America, and you had all kinds of other dinosaurs living on the separate continents. The continents have moved apart. Each one had their own types of dinosaurs. Dinosaurs were still thriving 66 million years ago, that Thursday morning, Thursday afternoon, whatever, when this happened, when very suddenly this 10-kilometer wide asteroid traveling faster than a speeding bullet fell from the sky, smashed into the earth with the force of over 1 billion nuclear bombs put together, punched a hole in the crust over 150 kilometers wide. And that led instantaneously to tsunamis, to fires, to volcanic eruptions. Dust was kicked into the atmosphere. It blocked out the sun. There was a nuclear winter. Plants couldn't make food. Plant eaters died. The meat eaters that ate the plant eaters died. Ecosystems collapsed. And that caused a mass extinction. And that doomed the dinosaurs. And there were plenty of dinosaurs that were alive on that very day that had to deal with that asteroid. Now, it's a tragic story and a very unexpected story. It was random. It was really bad luck. And a lot of things died, including, again, all the dinosaurs other than birds. But of course, some things did survive. And so a big part of my research now is moving on from the dinosaurs to see what happened after the asteroid. And so I found myself, at least before COVID, spending a lot of time in New Mexico in the US. This does look a lot more, again, like some of those places you might see on TV. This is the desert, this is the Badlands, there's lots of rocks, and there are fossils falling out of these rocks. And it's the best record here of fossils of those animals that survived the asteroid and then took over the world from the dinosaurs. And so I take my students to New Mexico. Now, I have a lot of PhD students and postdocs that are working on aspects of early mammal evolution. And that's the big project we're working on in my lab now. And this is, for instance, this is Sarah, who is my very first PhD student there. She is digging up the skeleton of an animal, and that animal had teeth that looked like this. And I think you can tell immediately this is not a dinosaur. These are not the teeth of like a T-Rex that look like a knife, but these things might look familiar because all of us, or at least most of us, have these kind of teeth in our own mouths. These are the teeth of mammals, characteristic molar and premolar teeth of mammals, with all those little cusps and ridges that grind up and cut up food. So it was the mammals, of course, that survived the extinction and took over from the dinosaurs. And just a few million years after the extinction, fossils of this type of mammal show up in New Mexico, and they become very common. And this mammal was about the size of a house cat. You could hold it in your arms. It had long arms and legs. It was a little bit awkward looking, but it had these opposable fingers that could grip the branches. It could climb trees. And this is one of the very first primates, essentially an ancestor of ours. And I think that goes to show how all of this is connected. The story of the dinosaurs, it may seem like something from the distant past, but really it's connected to us. If the dinosaurs did not die in that asteroid, then mammals would not have gotten an opportunity, and we would probably not be here having this discussion. So I will end on that note. I know this was a very, very quick tour of dinosaurs, but we have 10, 15 minutes now to answer any questions that you guys might have. So please do open it up for questions, and I'm happy to take any questions, anything you want to know about dinosaurs, whether it's from this talk or just more in general. So thank you very much for listening. Thanks again for the invitation, and I'm curious to hear what you think.
Thank you very much, Steve, for this wonderful presentation. And if the audience has any questions, then that's the opportunity to ask Steve about dinosaurs. Hopefully not baseball, right?
Yeah, so shout them out if you want. I don't know how you normally ask questions, but if you want to just jump in and ask, please do.
In the meantime, while people are, yeah, we have a question here. So
yep.
Yeah, go ahead. Attila, can you manage this? Sorry, I'm usually not the one who manages the sessions.
Sure. I think that Gevaria raised his hand by accident. I don't know, Gevaria, do we have a question there, or is just an error?
Yes, I have a question.
Okay, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Stephen, for the incredible presentation. I was just asking, the evidences that you have just presented here, particularly related to evolution, are more of structural evidences. I was just wondering if there are more evidences that could support rather than those related to structural evolution of the dinosaurs.
Yeah, so you mean for birds or for just dinosaurs as a whole?
Mm.
Yeah, I think if I understand, I mean, I think there's a lot that we know about the family tree of dinosaurs these days. This is a very important thing. A lot of the work that we do is finding fossils, describing fossils, understanding their anatomy, building these family trees, and that's the sequence that tells us about evolution. It's having that phylogeny, and we have a much better understanding now of the first birds and the dinosaurs that are most closely related to them. We also have a much better understanding of the relationships of the very first dinosaurs in the Triassic period. And what's really emerged from that is just how unimpressive a lot of those dinosaurs were. It's not just the one I mentioned about the little dinosaur Ancestor that's the size of a house cat, but it's all these other proper dinosaurs in the Triassic that are human size. Maybe some get up to the size of horses, some get a little bit bigger, maybe giraffe size by the end of the Triassic. But there's just nothing like T-Rexes or Brontosauruses at all at that time. But then we can look at the family tree and we can see how all these new groups emerged in the Jurassic period after that mass extinction. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that is a little bit more of just the evidence that we have for some of these evolutionary trends that I went through very quickly, I know, in this talk.
Thank you. Are there any questions?
Can I have a question, please?
Yes.
Sorry. Oh, I have a quick question about the early dinosaurs, the dinosaurs of the early Jurassic. So when, after the extinction of most of the large-bodied croc-like aquasaurs, did the emergence of large-bodied sauropods coincide with the evolution of large-bodied theropods as well, or did one of them came first and the other one followed? Do we know that? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we know a little bit, I would say, about that. The fossil record is still quite poor in the early Jurassic. So, we're basing some of these big, inferences on limited fossils. But what we do know right now is that the sauropod group started to become fairly big in the Triassic towards the end, even before the extinction. Now, they didn't become huge. They didn't become like airplane size, like Brontosaurus size, but you did have some that were becoming like the size of giraffes, maybe even a little bit bigger. And those were living in the late Triassic. But it doesn't seem like there were any big theropods that were living with those sauropodomorphs that were becoming bigger. So it does still seem like it was those crocodile-line archosaurs that in the Triassic were often, still the top predators. In the Jurassic, then, you definitely get a lot more sauropods and bigger sauropods pretty quickly. And then you start to see bigger predators. And there are some skeletons, but the footprint evidence here becomes important again. And so, you have a lot of footprint records in the early Jurassic of much bigger predators. So it seems to be, in general, that the plant eaters got bigger first, and then the predators got bigger later, and that it was really the extinction of the crocodile-line archosaurs that probably allowed both groups to get bigger, but especially allowed dinosaur predators to get bigger and become the top predators in most ecosystems.
Thank you very much.
I have a question. Thank you for a great talk. So I'm curious about if we know any specific traits of the ancestors of birds that favored their survival or facilitated their survival of the mass extinction, traits that the ancestors or earlier dinosaurs didn't have.
Yeah, that's a great question. That's another one of these mysteries, as why did birds survive the asteroid when so many other dinosaurs died, including so many types of dinosaurs that really would have looked and behaved quite a bit like birds? You think of like Velociraptors, for instance. Yes, they're not technically birds, but if you looked at one of them, you would think it's a bird. It was covered in feathers, it had wings, it surely had a very fast metabolism, and it was quite intelligent. I think the important thing to recognize is that actually a lot of birds did die when the asteroid hit. It's not like all birds survived. And the same is true with mammals, by the way. A lot of mammals died. There were a lot of marsupial type mammals, especially like in North America and in Europe, before the asteroid, and then they were almost wiped out. So, these extinctions, even the survivors were hit pretty hard. So with birds, you had a lot of, for lack of a better term, more primitive birds with claws and with longer tails and with teeth and that kind of stuff, that died out when the asteroid hit. And the only birds that survived were the more kind of modern style birds, the ones that had beaks instead of teeth, the ones that had big wings and could fly really well. And there's different explanations as to why that might be. There's an idea that maybe these birds were seed eaters, so they were eating seeds with those beaks, and being able to eat seeds is a good thing if there's an ecosystem that collapses. We see this with like forest fires and other ecological disturbances today. Like all the trees can die, all the leaves can be gone, but there's still seeds in the soil. So maybe being able to eat seeds helped get them through. It's been thought that maybe they nested on the ground. So the survivors nested on the ground, which if all these trees died, species that nested in the trees would have had a hard time. It's been suggested metabolism. Maybe the birds that survived were ones that were properly warm-blooded, that could grow really fast, that could reproduce really fast. I would say there's no like definitive answer yet. I think all of those ideas are pretty good ideas. They're all pretty consistent. They all make logical sense. I don't know if one was more important than the others. It might just be that birds, were in the analogy of like a gambler, or a casino or something, were holding just a good hand of cards. They had a bunch of things that helped when the world changed so quickly. Whereas the non-bird dinosaurs had a lot of drawbacks at that time. But I still think it's a really open question, why exactly these more advanced birds survived.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Steve, we have a question in the chat. I don't know if you can see it.
Let me pull it up. Yes, it's possible to create a link of, say, 5 species describes the evolution of birds. Yeah, I mean, so you can look at the family tree, you can look at the phylogeny. That's the evolutionary sequence, really. And you know, rather than pick just 5, you could look at all of them. But of course, there are differences. Different researchers, you know, produce slightly different family trees. But what we're really talking about is, you know, dinosaurs that ancestrally were quite large. They got smaller over time, this lineage that led to birds. And then you had things, you know, on that lineage that were things, you know, like in the Jurassic, things like, you know, ornitholestes and kind of more generalized meat-eating dinosaurs. And then as, you know, evolution progressed, you got, you know, raptor dinosaurs, dromaeosaurs, troodonids, things like that. So things like Zhenwanlong and Velociraptor, those are pretty close relatives of birds. They're kind of next in the sequence. And then you have the first true birds like Archaeopteryx. And so, you know, if you want to think of it as like a series of proxies of like, just to think about the general patterns, you know, you go from something, you know, kind of like a you know, big Allosaurus, like, you know, early Tetnaran to like an Ornitholestes to like a Velociraptor to like an Archaeopteryx or something. I mean, that's very simplistic, but it is true that Archaeopteryx is from the late Jurassic. A lot of these raptor, you know, fossils, the feathered ones from China, are actually younger. They're from the early Cretaceous, but that's just the luck of the fossil record, you know. So it wasn't these specific feathered dinosaurs that were the actual ancestors of birds, but they are members of groups that were the ancestors of birds, and they were kind of surviving to the present day. So the same way that like a chimpanzee is not our ancestor, it's a close cousin, but we would have had a common ancestor slightly farther back in time, and we just haven't found that as a fossil yet.
Thank you. I also have a question. You suggested that wings might have been used as display ornaments, basically. And my question is whether we have species where we have enough specimens to see whether there was any sexual dimorphism, because I know that for some primitive birds, Confuciusornis, for example, there is evidence about sexual dimorphism. What about dinosaurs?
It's really tricky. A lot of people have tried, and as far as I'm concerned, nobody's really been able to figure it out. Dinosaurs just don't seem to be like a lot of mammals where there is a very clear, you know, size difference or shape difference in some of the bones. Now, that might be because we don't have the sample sizes, you know, to really statistically figure this out. But it has been attempted, and there have been, you know, cases like with, say, horned dinosaurs, like the Triceratops dinosaurs that have all these ornate horns and frills and stuff, you know, looking at the sizes and shapes of those things with like morphometric analyses and seeing if there's clusters, and nobody's been able to convincingly do it. The only way that people, at least in my mind, have been able to convincingly show that a certain dinosaur is either male or female is if there's an egg preserved, you know, kind of in the you know, uterus area, and that's rare, but it has happened. There have been some fossils of some dinosaurs that, you know, dinosaur mothers that still have the egg inside the body, and then there's also some dinosaurs that have this really distinctive bone texture called medullary bone, which is something that birds today, that female birds, when they're shelling their eggs, they mine calcium from the bones to produce the shell, so that leaves this very characteristic texture, and that's been identified in some dinosaurs. So in some cases, you might be able to tell that an individual dinosaur was a female, but beyond that, really tough. But then, as you say, like with Confuciusornis, when you get into proper birds and you have information on the feathers, and it's really the lengths of the feathers, these tail feathers and so on, then there's much stronger evidence. But I don't know if there is, in the bones of those early birds, if there's sexual dimorphism, if there's anything clear. That I don't know. It's probably been looked at. It'd be worth checking out those studies.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any other questions?
So if there's no dimorphism in the bone structure or something like that, do you even have like cases where you know for sure that the two bones or two skeletons are from the same dinosaur species?
Yeah, that does make it tough sometimes to, if you do find a new specimen, let's say a new skeleton, and it's a little bit different from another skeleton, especially one that's found like in the same rock unit. You know, is this a new species, or is this just like dimorphism, or just kind of random interspecies variation, or ontogenetic variation? You know, for ontogenetic variation, we do have tools. I mean, you know, we can take thin sections of the bones. There's growth rings in bones. You can count those rings to kind of see how old the animal was when it died. Bone texture in thin section gives you some information on growth rate. So there are ways at least to tell, okay, this one's a juvenile, this one's an adult. But when it comes to, you know, sexual dimorphism, we just really don't know. So I'm sure there are cases, I would bet a large sum of money, there are cases where, you know, two different skeletons have gotten two different names, but in reality, they're just a male and female of the same species. But there's just not the sample size to really tease that out.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't know if we have more questions. There's a question in the chat.
Why at the end of the Cretaceous are there less and less species of dinosaurs and most of them larger sized? And why some birds lost their flying abilities during a time like Hesperorn, and Velociraptor? Okay, a lot to unpack there. I would say there's not a decline in dinosaur species towards the end of the Cretaceous. There have been a few very high profile studies that have used some quite nuanced and maybe not reliable statistical techniques to make that argument. Some of those have gotten quite a bit of publicity, but I've studied this issue quite carefully, and I'm very confident that there is no decline in dinosaurs towards the end of the Cretaceous. There's certainly not fewer and fewer species. I mean, maybe there's less speciation or something, I don't know, but there's not really a long-term decline there. I don't think that's ever really been shown convincingly. There are, at the end of the Cretaceous, some quite big dinosaurs. You know, T-Rex has kind of reached its zenith of tyrannosaur size, and you have enormous titanosaurs, not only in South America, but in North America too, like Alamosaurus. But also there were a lot of dinosaurs at that time that were small. So, you know, it wasn't that all dinosaurs were becoming bigger, or the dinosaurs on average were becoming bigger. I would, you know, there have been studies of dinosaur body size evolution over time, and I'm pretty sure those show that, you know, there wasn't some big increase in the late Cretaceous. And then as far as birds losing their flying abilities, you know, birds have lost flight many, many times over their history. I mean, you just think of, you know, plenty of birds today that don't fly. It just seems to be something that birds do if they find themselves in certain circumstances, whether it's, you know, they're on an island and, you know, weird things happen on islands, or, you know, for other reasons. So probably as soon as birds originated and started flying, there were some birds that, through the pressures of natural selection, lost that very expensive ability to fly. Now, whether Velociraptor is one of them, I would, you know, still argue no, that Velociraptor is a dromaeosaur. That's a kind of close Velociraptor relative, but that's a, you know, much more detailed, nuanced, anatomical, phylogenetic, you know, conversation, and it's not really settled, you know, despite many people looking at this. So you need a skull of Velociraptor to really figure that one out.
All right, thank you very much. I don't see any further questions. So yeah, just a final note about Velociraptor. I would like to ask your opinion about it, or what you know. I read somewhere that actually in the original book by Michael Crichton, he originally wanted to depict Deinonychus instead of the Velociraptor, but basically they just was suggested that Velociraptor sounds better. And so this is why they changed the name. I don't know if it's correct or not.
Yeah, I've heard that story, and I can't remember the details. I know that in the book, you know, he uses Velociraptor, and then of course in the film it's used. But the actual dinosaur, it doesn't follow the real Velociraptor. It has kind of components of like Deinonychus, and then in the film, you know, there's some components of this dromaeosaur that was found right around the time the movie was being made, called Utah Raptor, which is even bigger. So yes, it does seem like through some creative process, Crichton and then later Spielberg did mash together some different dromaeosaurs. And, you know, I can imagine maybe they chose to call it Velociraptor because it is such a cool name and it's easy to say. And it's, you know, but that happens sometimes with novels and with films, you know, some creative liberties to make sure the story is a good story and one people can relate to.
All right, thank you very much. I think, I don't know if you have still a short answer to our last question.
I just gotta go at 12:15, but yeah, that's another, you know, whatever, 7-8 minutes.
Yeah, so
I say my favorite dinosaur, it's T-Rex. I'm sorry to say, everybody says that, but it is for me. But yeah, I can say whether you want to talk more about dinosaurs or
the question is, do we know anything if the ability of active flying had appeared several times and in several dino lineages throughout their evolution? If so, are modern birds are the descendants of only one or these lines? If so, what could have been their advantage over other flying dino lines?
I mean, the way I told the story in this talk was pretty simple. I just really focused on kind of the line leading to modern birds, you know, which have fly by powered flight by flapping their wings on their arms to provide lift and thrust. But there is now evidence over the past 10 or 15 years that has emerged that there were other types of dinosaurs that were moving around the air in other ways. And so, you know, a great example of that is Microraptor from China. It not only has wings on its arms, but also on its legs, and it has quite a lot of big feathers on its tail. And there have been some great and really innovative work using, you know, wind tunnel experiments and computer modeling to show that Microraptor was a very good glider. Whether it could also employ powered flight, maybe, but it was probably at least able to glide in a way that's very different from modern birds. And then there's some, you know, newer discoveries from China of these Batwinged Dinosaurs, of these small little dinosaurs like Yi that had wings of skin sticking out from their bodies, kind of like a bat. So they had feathers on their bodies, but they also have these skin wings, and that's a totally different way of flying. So really what it seems to be is that there's this zone on the family tree of dinosaurs where these Sauropod dinosaurs, which are covered in feathers, had gotten so small, and they were evolving all kinds of different feathers and stuff, that they were probably experimenting with flight in different ways. And there were plenty of different offshoots that just through whatever localized natural selection was happening, were gliding, maybe even flapping in different ways. But ultimately, because of the end Cretaceous extinction and other extinctions along the way, the only survivor of that great time of experimentation were the modern birds.
Thank you. And the last question, do birds compete out pterosaurs or just an old theory?
People still argue about that. There's a lot of different lines of evidence that have been used to compare birds and pterosaurs, to compare their flying styles, to see if they really even were in competition. Some people have argued quite forcibly that no, they were flying in very different ways. They were doing different things. Other people have argued, for instance, using like body size data, that, you know, pterosaurs kind of, you know, were shunted off and had to become these really big animals in the Cretaceous because birds kind of took over the small flying niches. In that sort of scenario, it's like, yes, the pterosaurs were kind of being pressured by birds, maybe even outcompeted. You know, I don't know. I don't have a good answer to that. I mean, pterosaurs were the first vertebrates to evolve flight, and they were around for a very long time. They were quite good flyers. They went extinct when the asteroid hit. You know, the idea used to be that there were only giant pterosaurs alive at that time, but from Transylvania, for instance, there's now some smaller pterosaurs from the very late Cretaceous. So, you know, it's not like all of them at that time were just these giant freaks, you know, so there were still some good flyers. So if the asteroid never hit, you know, some pterosaurs probably would have survived. Would they have been as diverse as birds? Maybe not, but, you know, birds are able to be diverse for a number of reasons. So I think, I'm sure there was competitive pressures. There were kind of, you know, very interesting macro evolutionary things happening between birds and pterosaurs. But I don't think it was a simple story of just like, oh, pterosaurs were around for a while, then this new type of dinosaur evolves that has wings and can fly, and it's like game over for pterosaurs. I mean, you know, at the very least, pterosaurs, I mean, the Archaeopteryx is about 150 million years old. We know that actual, true, real birds were around by then. And the last pterosaurs are 66 million years old when the asteroid hit. So you have, you know, you're getting close to 100 million years of pterosaurs continuing to live with birds. So if there was some kind of competition there, it wouldn't have been something where, you know, the birds were just destroying the pterosaurs. It was maybe the birds just, you know, became a bit better, more diverse.
All right, thank you very much. I think we could chat for hours and hours more about dinosaurs. Thank you very much again, but we have to end this session and let you go. Thank you very much again for this fantastic talk on a fascinating topic, and maybe another time we can have some more chats about the news in the world of paleontology.
Yeah.
So thanks again.
Yeah, thank you, everybody, and thanks for the invitation to do this. And you know, keep in touch. Anybody who has any questions, anything you weren't able to ask, just, you know, send me off an email or something. Always happy to chat, and you know, hopefully meet some of you guys in person one day. And if any of you have ever you know, find yourself in Scotland here, just check in, let me know, and stop by and see us.
Excellent. Thank you so much again. Thanks for the audience for showing up, and then I'll see you next week. Have a nice day, everyone. Goodbye.
Yep, take care, everybody. Yep, bye.
Goodbye.